Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're looking at a pretty startling trend that's literally sweeping through the classrooms of some of the most elite universities in the country. It's a massive shift in cultural and religious literacy. And it has some deep civilizational implications. Interestingly enough, the alarms aren't just sounding from church pews. They're actually coming straight from secular academics right inside the Ivy League.
Okay, let's dive into this. We really have to ask ourselves, what actually happens when the absolute brightest minds at elite universities completely forget the foundational texts of Western civilization? It's a huge question, right? And it really challenges our everyday assumptions about modern education and what it actually means to be culturally literate in today's world.
Section 1. The Princeton Paradox. So this paradox was recently brought to light in a Washington Post op-ed by Gregory Conti. He's an associate professor of politics at Princeton. He recounted this super revealing incident where a colleague of his hosted a lecture on religion and free speech. But the thing is, the lecture completely failed to resonate with the students. Why? Well, the speaker kept referencing the Ten Commandments, and several of these elite Princeton students literally had no idea what they were. The baseline religious literacy you need to even engage with the premise of the lecture was just completely absent.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark historical irony of it all. Over on the left, we're reminded that Princeton was originally founded by Christians, specifically for Christian learning, and even boasted the towering historical theologian Jonathan Edwards as one of its early presidents. But then, you look on the right, and we see the reality of its modern campus. It's a thoroughly secularized culture where these incredibly smart students are completely oblivious to something as foundational as the Ten Commandments.
And honestly, this isn't just a one-off anecdote. Professor Conti, who, by the way, openly identifies as a non-believer himself, points out that this massive blind spot is incredibly common among exceptionally bright, curious young people. He frequently runs into students who are completely unable to distinguish between the Old and New Testaments, or they can't even explain the basic historical differences between Catholicism and Protestantism. It's pretty wild when you think about it.
Section 2. The Price of Cultural Amnesia.
So if we zoom out from that single Princeton classroom, we start to see some much broader civilizational consequences. When you lack a basic grasp of biblical narratives, your broader education absolutely suffers. Let's break down these three specific pillars. First, literature and art. Masterpieces by Shakespeare, Jane Austen, or Rembrandt, they lose a lot of their depth because their core moral narratives are deeply rooted in Christianity. Second, political rhetoric. Think about the foundational speeches from Abraham Lincoln to Barack Obama. They rely heavily on biblical idioms that, well, now just fall on deaf ears. And third, the legal order itself is incredibly intertwined with this forgotten heritage.
Just look closely at the actual physical architecture of American law. The friezes and murals of the United States Supreme Court building explicitly depict Moses and the Ten Commandments as a pivotal turning point in human legal history. But today's elite students, they can no longer read the very heritage that their own institutions are physically built upon.
This actually connects directly to a point made by the 20th century political theorist Carl Schmitt. He famously argued all political concepts are theological concepts secularized. Now, even if we treat that claim as, say, a slight exaggeration, it demonstrates a really important historical reality. Past political thinkers were almost universally either reacting to or rebelling against the Christian faith. So trying to evaluate their work without actually knowing the faith itself, it's practically an academic impossibility.
Section 3. A cut flower civilization. Let's move to and see how this builds into a really powerful metaphor highlighted by theologian Dr. Albert Mohler. To help contextualize this rapid cultural erosion, we have this vivid visual idea, the cut flower civilization. Basically, this refers to a society that currently appears vibrant, colorful, and completely alive on the surface, but has actually been severed from its foundational, life-giving roots. It is essentially coasting on the momentum of a past that it just no longer understands.
The phrase originally comes from a 20th century Quaker theologian named Elton Trueblood, who warned of this exact long-term civilizational trajectory. He wrote, "A cut flower civilization is like a bunch of flowers that still look beautiful in a vase on the table, but they are cut off from their roots. They are destined to wither and die." It's definitely a sobering image of cultural decay.
Section 4. The secular concern. Okay, analyzing this crisis means we really need to look at it from multiple angles. Starting from a purely secular and societal perspective, the American civic experiment is actually endangered when citizens can no longer comprehend its foundational principles. I mean, when the Declaration of Independence asserts that individuals are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that isn't just a phrase pulled out of thin air, right?
Obscuring that vast Judeo-Christian inheritance produces future leaders who lack the cultural competency to really understand their own country or to intelligently deliberate with the millions of believing citizens they share it with.
Section 5. The Christian Concern.
But how is this exact same crisis viewed from the opposing Christian perspective? Well, for the Christian, the stakes go quite a bit beyond just political order. First, there's the concern that without this foundation, human dignity and rights lose their objective anchor. But perhaps more importantly, this cultural impoverishment exposes a massive failure within Christian communities themselves. It highlights a really critical lapse in passing down foundational knowledge, and it serves as an urgent internal wake-up call for parents and churches to return to home-based stewardship and education.
Section 6. The path forward. So, the crucial point is, how do we actually address this?
Well, Professor Gregory Conti concludes his editorial with a really compelling appeal. He says, as universities rewrite their curricula to form more culturally deep and civic-minded citizens, they should begin with basic instruction in the Bible and Christianity. And you have to admit, it is an absolutely astounding irony of our cultural moment that a non-believing political scientist is the one leading the charge here, demanding basic biblical literacy simply to save the depth and integrity of the American academic order.
Which brings us to our final, vital question for you to reflect on. If our civilizational roots are truly vanishing, what exactly is going to grow in their place? Will it be a society with the depth to sustain human rights, literature, and intelligent civic debate? Or just the withering remnants of a cut-flower civilization? It's a massive question that every single one of us has to confront. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.